Hello and welcome to the Nerd Emotion, and today what I'm trying to do is take apart this whole Ecoboost or ecoboom engine wet belt problem and ideally give you some insight into how they work and what's the reason and why they chose them and all that kind of stuff. So let's get into it.
Hey now, honey, I've been driving around in my car, looking for some kind of open bar. It's gonna be alright, gonna be alright. Got no money, but I'll work it out with my charm. Having a good time, ain't doing no harm. It's gonna be alright, gonna be.
Okay, so the whole wet belt thing is quite interesting, and I don't, I don't think it's a great engineering solution, and I have my own reasons why I think that. But let's have a little look at what it is first. So, when you look at an engine, let's have a little picture here of an engine. Let's shut this camera down so that we know what we're doing. Okay. Here we go. So this is the inside of a 2 litre. This is actually, as far as I know, a diesel engine that's in the Transit, which is a wet belt setup. Here you have, these are the two camshafts running through, and these are the sprockets on the end of them. And this is the belt here. There's some bits that have been taken off. But the belt basically runs these two camshafts in time and then goes down to the crankshaft, which is what you have your pistons on, which is on the back wall there. I'll show you another picture. These are your pistons here that go up and down. These are your valves. So basically these sprockets turn. They turn this great big camshaft here, which moves these lifters up and down, which are the valves. So you've got your inlet and your exhaust, fuel in, fuel out. And then this big pulley down here at the bottom, that's your crank, which runs along the bottom here, that moves these conrods up and down with the pistons, up and down as they fire, push exhaust, whatever the 4-stroke is. So that's how they work. Now you'll see on the front of this is the EcoBoost engine that's in question. On the front of this one, you can see that on the sprocket there's like what appears to be like a vernier caliper, but it's not. What that is something called variable valve timing. So with these small engines, what they're trying to do is get as much power out of them as possible. So one of the things that you can do is you can turbocharge it or supercharge it, so forced induction, which makes it faster, but also you can change the timing on the go. And one of the things they do is they move the camshafts slightly backwards and forwards, which changes the valve overlap. And effectively, it's a bit like having race cams in your engine without it being a race engine. So when you're driving along really slow, it's in a very lazy position. There's not so much valve overlap. Then when you want loads of power, the valve overlap changes and it becomes like a little racing engine. And that's how they produce more power. So they've had that for years and years and years. It's not new technology. It works really well. Most manufacturers have it down with no issue at all. And as I understand it, that isn't really the problem. But I just want to explain what it is. Also, you'll often get on the side of cam belts. Now, this is the water pump on the EcoBoost, which is separate and is run by this what we call an auxiliary belt. It's a multi-rib belt. It doesn't require any timing, but it just goes around the auxiliary. So you might have your aircon, your alternator, and in this case your water pump. It spins it, and it just takes some power from the engine by transferring it via kinetic energy on a belt, essentially. So the thing that everybody's really up in arms about is the fact that this belt is inside this timing cover, has actually got access to engine oil, which is in the sump, and it actually runs through the oil. So why did they make this decision? Well, there's a couple of reasons. One, they reckon that it saves around 1% on fuel. So that doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're trying to get a car through its emissions tests and you want to give it some green points, then 1% fuel saving sounds really good. The other thing is they were hoping by using lubricant within the system that it would actually help keep things from wearing out. But we'll get into that in a little more depth. The other thing that they were hoping for was basically the belt would, in their mind, would last longer, then you'd have longer service intervals. And also, one of the big problem with these small engines that are like 2-cylinder, 3-cylinder, they're off balance quite a lot of the time, and the engines can be quite noisy, and a lot of the new direct fuel injection systems are also very noisy, so it makes it quieter. So those are all the positive reasons around why they wanted to do it. Now, one of the things that I think is quite interesting is that actually I don't think it's all Ford's fault on its own. And I tell you why I think that is because this engine is actually a joint project with a company called PSA. And PSA are owned by a company called Stellantis. Obviously, I'm using Wikipedia here, so take everything with a pinch of salt. But Stellantis are absolutely massive. They're now Fiat, Chrysler, so you've got loads and loads of vehicles under that. Well, it says here that last year they were the 4th largest automaker by sales. They do all sorts of stuff. What's interesting about them is the key people that are involved in the company, and also who the owners are. So you've got Exor, which is Italian family. You've got Peugeot with 6.98%. Then you've got BPI France, which is a public investment, a public sector investment bank. It is a joint venture of 2 state-owned enterprises. Interesting. And then we have Dongfeng Motor Corporation, which is a Chinese state-owned automobile company. So those are your owners. Now, Ford isn't part of Stellantis, but often you will find that manufacturers will try and cut costs in development by working with other companies. For instance, the Ecotech engine that is in the Vauxhalls, that's from years ago, that's been around for ever and ever. That was actually Italian designed. It was developed in the UK at Ricardo Engineering. One of my friends was one of the people on the development team, and he said at one point that engine was so bad they were thinking about they had to either put a load of money in and carry on, or scrap the idea and start again. And actually, those engines, now that they've got them really good, they're pretty strong by all accounts, and that you see them all over the place. So it's not always in a car. It's not always the manufacturer that is actually designing and making that engine. So the problem is that also PSA engines, so the PureTech ones that you find in the Citroën and Peugeot, also have wet belts. And this is a really good example of what starts to go wrong. So let's have a look at the timing belt. I have got somewhere in one of these, there we go. So this is what a timing belt looks like. I know some of you, this will be like sucking eggs and you know all about it already. But for some people, they have no idea. They've probably never even touched an engine. So I'm trying to educate you guys. So a timing belt is basically, it has teeth on it that go across, that fit inside the cam and the crank sprockets and keep it all in time. And what happens is, if you don't keep all of that in time, those pistons will come up and they'll hit the valves as the valves stick out for their whatever they're doing, whether they're doing an exhaust stroke or whether they're doing a inlet stroke. What can happen is the valve will stick out, the piston's out of time, it smacks on that and bends the valves. And sometimes I've seen it in massive ways when they've failed. It will put holes in pistons, it will throw the conrod which connects the piston to the crank straight out the block. I've seen valves, literally the top snap off them, and then they get bounced around inside the engine and just destroy everything. So I mean, it can be absolutely catastrophic. So that's why it's so important to keep it in time. So that's what this does. And you can see here, it's much like a tyre on a vehicle that's made up of sections. So you've got your tread, then you've got another layer of sometimes it's Kevlar, then you have another layer of metal wires, and then you'll have more rubber, and so on and so forth. So a cam belt is much the same, or timing belt. This one you can see, and it's probably the most common one, is they use glass fibre strands that run through the belt that make them incredibly strong. And then it's rubber. Sometimes they use neoprene, which is quite interesting for the teeth. But quite often the teeth are like they're part of the rubber, or they can be neoprene like this with nylon treatment over the top, like almost like a mesh that goes over. You'll see if you ever look at a cam belt on the face of it, it doesn't look as smooth as that. And you'll see also on that Transit engine, this has got like this white finish. Now I kind of did a little bit of research, and what I found out is that's something called PTFE, which you use in plumbing, and you put it around pipes before you connect them, and it creates a good seal. And I'm wondering if they're using PTFE to try and lower the amount of damage on the sort of contact point of the cam belt against the sprocket, so there's less wear essentially. So that's what I think it is. I might be wrong. This is from Miller's Oil, great company. I used to use their racing oil when I used to do karting. So they make some really good points here. So I'm going to just quickly go through some of them. Timing belt in oil systems, so that's what they are. The timing belt is in the oil. Also known as wet belt systems, have been around for over 15 years. Now that might be true, however, it's just lately that they've got really bad. Vehicle manufacturers such as Ford, PSA and Volkswagen use them. Now Volkswagen only use one type of wet belt, as I understand. So they're 1 litre, 1.2, they're all timing chain or cam belt. The only wet belt that they use is in some of the 2 litre engines. It's a little belt in the sump that runs the oil pump. And as I know, I haven't seen loads of them fail, to be totally honest. So, yeah. Wet belt systems were introduced to reduce the weight of components. Well, I didn't say that before, but there you go. I don't know how much that would make it any less heavy than using a dry belt system, but hey ho. Reduce engine size, maximise efficiency and meet emissions targets. As always, it's about emissions. So how can wet belt systems be damaged? Oil impurities such as soot and other oil oxidation breakdown debris can get between the belt and the teeth pulleys, weakening the belt. So a lot of people don't realise that when oil is in your engine over time, it breaks down into various components, and you get it ends up quite acidic when it's being used for beyond its service life, and that obviously is not going to help the belt. Wear on outer belt coating and now this is the important bit. So we looked at this belt on this PureTech engine with these cracks. So I mean that belt's running very close to the edge as well, but all these cracks are super important. Now if you have an Ecotech or a PureTech, I'm pretty sure that you can open the oil cap and you can see the cam belt itself on top. And there's actually a tool that they make which is like a loop with what looks like a little chair that you can go on and check the width of the cam belt to make sure it's like not essentially swollen up. But as soon as you get cracks like this, then you're letting oil into the gaps and to the inner core of the belt. Where on the outer belt coating exposes the underlying materials direct to the oil, which may contain unburnt or partially combusted fuel that attacks exposed belts materials. So that's another thing with diesels and petrols. There is always a little bit of fuel that will pass the rings. So that's, you take your foot off the throttle, there's just that minute second where a bit of fuel gets fired on. It doesn't get ignited. It goes out the exhaust and gets dealt with in the exhaust, or some of it will pass the rings and go beyond into the oil at the bottom. It won't be a lot, but you don't need a lot. And it goes back to, if you exceed your service time, then you get more of that fuel getting in your oil, and over a long time, then you'll end up in a position where your oil's thinned out. Teeth can become detached, creating a smooth section on the belt. This causes the pulley to slip and changes the engine's timing, and that's when you get that massive boom, engine's dead. The sidewall of the belt being exposed to oil and oil debris can cause delamination of the belt. It's the same thing. If that belt runs up like against anything that touches that belt can cause it to fail. So these guys are saying the same as what I would say, which is you need to have a look at the condition of your belt if you can see it. If you've got any cracks like that, I would advise you to stop driving it straight as soon as possible, get it booked clean, and get that belt changed, because it's just not worth risking it. And it will likely go bang. The other thing that happens, so I don't know, I couldn't find as much on the PSA engine, but people did seem to like the PSA engine apart from this belt design. But the bits of this belt will start to flake off over time, and obviously you can't see it. So what happens is it falls into the sump where, and the sump, I'll show you, let's go back to this picture here. So the sump is this section down here. So in there will be a little, what looks like a strainer. So it's normally like a pipe with a round disc or a square or something with some mesh on it. And actually the amount of size of that mesh is normally around the size of a 50p piece. It's not huge. And then what happens is bits of that belt are falling off, and then it gets stuck in the strainer, and then you start getting oil pressure issues. And the problem is you might not get an oil warning light straight away. It might be that it only does it when it first starts, or it might be that one day a bit of the debris falls away and you don't get it for a while, or it could be you're on the motorway and over time gradually the oil pressure is starting to drop as the oil gets hotter. I mean, you just don't know. So the signs of that is a very rattly top end. So what happens is all the oil ways up here, you start to get less oil up there, and then you get less oil in the sump, and basically on the top part of your crank, which is, you've got your shells in there that hold the crankshaft. What happens, there's not enough oil that gets to those, and then you start getting what we call rod knock, or bottom end starts to fail, and you get knocking, and that's it, it's destroyed. So your belt might be all right and intact, but actually because it's coming apart, it's destroying your engine. So please get it checked. Make sure you change the oil. Sorry, I'm getting a phone call. Make sure you change the oil, and make sure you've got the correct oil. Get the specifications from the manufacturer of what oil you need. The other thing that you need to check is, if you're a DIY mechanic and you have time, or if you're a workshop that does products like BG products, or I'm trying to think of another one, Wins or something like that, and you use a lot of additives, there's nothing wrong with that. If you're using a decoking or engine flush, and you're running it up with that engine flush in there, you've got to check that flush is compatible for those belts, because otherwise you could be destroying the belt by cleaning the engine. So don't use flushes unless the flush specifically says this is suitable for wet belts, because it's not worth the risk. Other problems on the Ecoboost engine that I found was with the water pump, with the front casing that goes on. So this bit here, believe it or not, the front casing goes around and actually incorporates the water pump. There's a tiny little seal on the back of that, and it's not very good, and basically will empty your coolant from your engine, and then your engine overheats, and then you've got another problem then. And another one was to do with a pipe that goes between the head and I think it's the expansion tank, if I'm not right. What's my notes here? It is called the I don't know. There's a name for it, but it's a special pipe. But yeah, it basically will kill your engine. Well, if you don't have coolant in, it can't stay cool. So yeah, that's another one on that, and I'm sure there's loads of other stuff as well. But that is essentially what's going on. So, is it all Ford's fault? No. And let me go back to this camera. Is it Ford's fault? I don't think it is all Ford's fault. I think it's actually a PSA Ford fault. My concern why everybody's going after Ford, I think it's because probably there's more of these engines about than the Peugeot Citroen ones, because Ford have a bigger market share in the UK. It's much like the car theft thing with Range Rovers, kind of got the brunt of it, when actually the most stolen car was the Mercedes A-Class. So it's gone nuclear with this engine, but actually the PureTech ones are just as bad. So the PureTech ones, I haven't done enough research to find out how many of the PSA specific engines have the wet belt. I know the 1.2 does. The Ecoboost, it's the 1 litre, the 2 litre, which is in the Transit, which I mean, in that is a crazy idea, and the 1.5, which is also I think in Transits, but the smaller one. Now, I think this all goes back to an issue, which is we've got like a skill gap. So we've got engineers, and then we've got who have been around a long time and have made a lot of mistakes and know what works and what doesn't. For instance, Ford used to have a terrible problem with their 1.6 diesel and their 1.8 that was in like the Ford Escort. Man, that diesel engine was slow, but you used to have a problem with dropping belts, and they solved the problem, and actually it wasn't so much of an issue. I'm sure somebody will have tried a wet belt at some point, but there's other ways of doing it. You can have cam gear, which is actual gear that effectively, like the camshaft ones would be touching. It would be touching maybe a water pump one, and then it would go down through some gears to the crank. London Taxis had that with a Nissan engine that had come out of the Vanette. Great idea, worked really well, executed it like well. That engine would do billions of miles, no problem. Wasn't very efficient, but it was a very good engine. And arguably efficiency, if you've got vehicles off the road or running badly, is probably worse than having an engine that maybe isn't as efficient in the first place, but never goes wrong, and gives out the correct emissions that it stated at the start. The other issue, I think, is because there's this skills gap. You've got young engineers coming up. They're building a lot of the designs on CAD. They've got their own ideas on how to do something. They might not be fully listening to the people before them because they're old dinosaurs and we've got technology now, and I totally understand that. But you know what? Sometimes these older engineers know their stuff. I mean, you've only got to look at Boeing at the moment and what their situation is. The 747, Queen of the Skies, was built with little to no problem in such a short space of time. Yet now they can't even plug a door on an existing one without somebody leaving the bolts out, or have a major issue where they design the software incorrectly that makes them fall into the ground. So there are definite issues with the way things are going, and I think this is just a classic example of engineers, one, not thinking about the customer, two, not thinking about the people that have got to fix them, and I just think it's a massive like schoolboy error that's cost millions. So that's my thoughts. If you have any other thoughts on this, then please reach out, put it in the comments. If there's anything else you would like me to explain, then please fire me a message, and I'll gladly explain it. And I hope this video has been helpful to you. I think my personal view is there's going to be some sort of legal action on this, because you can't really get away with making such a mistake. But the problem is, if Ford have got all this like design and stuff from Stellantis, who's owned by potentially the French government, they're probably not going to help them, and this could be a really bad position for Ford. So yeah, there's all sorts going on. I'm only speculating. That's only my opinion. I might be completely wrong, but I think Ford are between a rock and a hard place at the moment. And in fact, one of my friends, Mark, I might get him on the channel. His Focus exploded with exactly the same problem, and he lost a few thousand. So yeah, that's it. So go out there, check your belts, make sure you've had the service, it's the correct oil. Don't use engine flushes, and if you need a repair, then make sure you get somebody that knows what they're doing with these engines. All right, peace out, and I'll catch you on the flip side.